Hello everyone, welcome to the AI series with NeuTigers, a show where we explore the benefits of Edge AI. I am Stan Berthelot, VP of Growth here at NeuTigers. I see quite a few people connected already, and as always do, I would like to ask you to please use the chat panel to tell us where you are connecting from. So before we dive into today's topic, I would like to update you on NeuTigers. NeuTiger is a Princeton spin-out building AI solution on the edge that bring AI to resource-constrained devices, from healthcare to industrial IoT, cybersecurity, and more. In the healthcare sector, we are focusing our effort on wearable and device-based AI models for disease monitoring, as well as data analytics, risk stratification, and synthetic data. The French speaker out there will want to mark their calendar for our next live event on January 18th with Professor Galacteros. We will talk about sickle cell disease and the work we do to help prevent crises. I now want to introduce our guest, NeuTigers CMO and practicing neuroradiologist, Dr. Gregory Nicola. Greg is a highly respected physician and a key authority on health policy and economics. He has been trained at New York Presbyterian Hospital, as well as Weill Cornell Medical Center. Today, he practices as a neuroradiologist and holds several health system and national leadership positions. Welcome to the show, Greg.
Thanks, Stan. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
So let me remove your bio. So unfortunately, Greg, because of COVID, many of your staff have had to stay home and you had to cancel our event, our live event, right, to handle emergencies. However, you accepted to record this event ahead of time. Today is Tuesday. So thank you so much for making time for us today. It's definitely appreciated. I want to encourage all the viewers to ask questions using the chat panel, because Greg, you told me that you would be happy to answer those questions during the replay, right? So we are going to record a session where you go through the question and we'll post that on the replay that will be posted on YouTube, right? So Greg, let's dive into it. What is the state of AI in healthcare today? I feel that there are both a lot of fears and also a lot of hope when it comes to AI. So where AI is actually being used and where do you think delivering the most benefits?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll add that there's also a lot of hype. There's hope, hype, and fear with AI. I think we're actually coming out of the hype phase where initially we had a lot of AI researchers not really into or knowing the healthcare subject matter well, who hyped it up. We also had a number of healthcare experts who didn't know much about AI hype it up. And now we're starting to see the experts who know both fields really kind of settle where it belongs, build use cases. And the fact is it needs lots of research in healthcare in order to establish itself. One of the reasons is that healthcare data, a lot of it is extremely subjective and difficult to tease out of the chart functions that we have in the medical system. We also have to remember we're dealing with biologic systems and we have ethnic, biologic, genetic variability that makes developing algorithms inside the healthcare space challenging. We often see models develop that become quite fragile when they're used in the real world setting. But a lot of these negatives and downside of AI are now being worked out, and we're starting to see a lot of promise and good research. I do think that we're seeing AI in many places in the healthcare system right now. A lot of them are behind the scenes. For example, there's AI algorithms buried in some advanced equipment we use in healthcare, for example, CT and MRI, that lead to operational efficiencies of that equipment. The more face value AI where clinicians use, we really haven't seen a lot of it. The one sector we have seen a lot of it in is actually my field, which is radiology. One of the reasons we've seen a lot of AI in radiology is that the data from an imaging exam tends to be less subjective and more objective data It's robust. There's a lot of it available for training algorithms. And we see researchers and clinicians alike really diving into those data sets to try to create algorithms. In radiology, however, I will say what's been created for patient care is very low-hanging fruit. It tends to be redundant with what clinicians already do, and the value has been fairly questionable. There may be a quality improvement, but we're not entirely sure the entire value to the patients there, in that it may be creating a number of false positives in the healthcare network, leading to maybe downstream increase in costs, which we need to study if that's happening. So we're still working out the value. Where I see value in the future, in, for example, every clinical field, is being able to predict disease worsening or the likelihood of disease in a patient, or whether the patient is going to become high risk. Those type of algorithms are not low-hanging fruit, and they take significant research. And that's why we haven't seen them permeate the market yet, because the research is being done now. So that's kind of where I see it in a nutshell.
All right. So one of the most compelling reasons organizations deploy AI is to cut down costs, right? And to increase on efficiency. For example, AI can scan thousands of data points and pinpoint really where providers should be focusing their attention. Is that how AI reduces cost?
Well, yes, there's no doubt. There's a theory that it can reduce costs by, for example, creating operational efficiencies in the healthcare market, where maybe you don't need as many clinicians or technical staff caring for a patient as you did in the past, because AI is running in the background as a safety net. To be honest, we haven't seen that at all. In fact, the AI iterations on the market now may actually create work or neutralize work at best. But we do hope in the future there's enough of these algorithms running. And right now, what we're seeing is narrow scope AI. So it does one thing. And when we see AI that's more general, or multiple narrow scope AIs in a treatment paradigm, we may actually see those operational efficiencies where you can reduce the number of clinical staff per patient. Maybe not reduce overall clinical staff if you're able to take more care of more patients, but at least reduce the amount of clinical care you need per patient. Again, that's theoretical. Where we hope to see real impact on cost is, again, prediction. Where we want to see AI is prediction, not necessarily analytics, but predictive analytics, where we can say this patient's likely to develop a cancer, and intervention earlier will prevent the long stream consequences and long stream costs of having cancer. And we'll go through some of those case examples. For example, sickle cell anemia is something NeuTigers is working on. If you can predict when a patient goes into these so-called crises, which are these episodes where they're in extreme pain and can lead to strokes and heart attacks and all sorts of complications, if you can predict when those are going to happen and start intervention early, you theoretically could prevent a hospitalization, which is an extremely costly event. If you can prevent that hospitalization, you've created that efficiency where we hope to get. Now, that kind of algorithm or that type of analytics takes a long time and a lot of research, and we haven't seen that hit the market, but it's certainly where we hope the market's going, and certainly NeuTigers is working on those type of advanced analytics.
Yeah, Greg, do you want to say a word about what exactly NeuTiger is doing with sickle cell?
Yeah. So NeuTigers is able to use pretty much any data source that can be generated for a patient. Our favorable data source right now has been deploying remote monitoring devices or wearable medical devices on patients and detecting a physiologic signal. For example, we can put a smartwatch on somebody, and this is what we are doing in sickle cell, that can detect, pulse, blood pressure, pulse ox, skin galvanization, a number of physiologic parameters. And the sophistication of AI can make inferences and correlate how those different physiologic data points interact. And we can build algorithms that say, hey, the way these physiologic parameters are currently trending signals that the patient is having a potential sickle cell crisis. And by alerting us, serving as an early warning system, we can actually intervene while the patient's still at home and potentially prevent a hospitalization. Now, all those are are theoretical terms. We are doing the bench research to prove something like that is possible. And we hope to extrapolate that to many other diseases.
Right, right. And, when we were preparing this interview, you were saying that AI is especially relevant when it comes to chronic disease.
Yeah.
Why do you think it is so?
Well, I think that if we want to find use cases that are impactful in the healthcare system, currently we don't have a lot of those use cases. We're doing what clinicians already do, maybe slightly better, but maybe better to the point where we have false positives, which I talked about earlier. We want to move away from that type of AI use case and move to AI use cases where AI does something a clinician can't do. They can actually predict an event that a clinician can't do. And where you start thinking of use cases that are like that are in chronic diseases. The next thing you want to think about is what use cases can AI be deployed in where there is a potential cost savings by producing prediction. So you start thinking of the chronic diseases, and the main reason is because they often lead to high cost hospitalizations. So if you can predict worsening of a chronic disease such as emphysema or congestive heart failure or sickle cell anemia, you can predict worsening of those before we can currently predict it. We can implement therapies that potentially prevent hospitalizations. So here we have a disease that's ripe for analytics. It can be deployed with wearable medical devices, all these chronic diseases, and we have a high cost event that could potentially be prevented. And to me, that is a really ripe case to start doing research on, to develop algorithms that can actually make an impact on patient care, and something clinicians currently can't do. And patients might not even be able to do for themselves. So that's where the excitement is around AI, and it's certainly what NeuTigers is working on. And Stan, if you don't mind, I want to expand a little bit more on what NeuTigers is doing, because we're not that narrow in scope. For example, we're building out a platform that's much broader than, hey, can we predict chronic disease? We're really thinking about healthcare and the care transformation processes. How do we support our clinical colleagues from a fee-for-service environment into, really getting paid and treating patients for outcomes as opposed to just doing a bunch of procedures and getting paid? And so we're developing a whole suite of products for care transformation. And when I think about care transformation, there are a number of pillars that are necessary to transform a system from fee-for-service to outcomes-based. And the first thing I think of is, how do we engage patients? And NeuTigers thought of that as well. Our care transformation platform does this. We have ways to engage patients through chats, through messaging platforms and groups that have like diseases so they can share thoughts with other patients. The next thing I think about for care transformation is robust data analytics. I've explained some of the data analytics we're doing. We can also use synthetic data to bolster the data we're getting. We can do risk stratification of data that's already out there. And then the last pillar of care transformation in my mind is aligning payer incentives. It's something NeuTigers can't necessarily work on itself. We're not a payer. However, we can support payers in that endeavor by doing the bench research necessary to look at new ways to practice patient care that's more value added. For example, predictive analytics. And the last thing is the data analytics is important, but acquiring rich data is invaluable. Part of our care transformation platform is a feedback loop with our wearable medical devices. That we don't make the wearable medical devices, but we deploy a number of wearable medical devices that we make algorithms for. We're able to get feedback from those devices to make sure they're on properly, make sure the data is rich, give messages to the patient if they need to make adjustments. If you're not able to do that and communicate to the patient on wearing a wearable medical device that it's properly giving you rich data, then you're really behind the eight ball and you're not acquiring the rich data that you need. NeuTigers has thought of all these processes and are tackling every one of them.
Wow, fascinating. Greg, we are getting at the end of our conversation today, but you already mentioned what we are doing with the care transformation platform. Are there any other projects that you are very passionate about when it comes to NeuTiger? I don't know if you mentioned mental health, but that might be one.
Yeah, mental health to me fits in the same basket as chronic disease. We are working with a number of US and European research institutes again, we're doing the bench research to look at ways to predict, for example, worsening of an anxiety crisis or worsening of a major depressive episode. Because again, those are ripe for early intervention and prevention of either hospitalization or downstream utilization of healthcare resources that would be unnecessary if you were able to predict earlier worsening of the disease. And so mental health is something we're actively involved in research on, and looking at producing algorithms to help patients and to help in care transformation.
All right, good. Well, again, thank you so much for making this recording today, Tuesday. We are going to go live, whatever happened, on Thursday. So guys who are watching us now on Thursday, make sure you ask all your questions, and Greg will reply to them. So Greg, good luck to you going through the COVID crisis. How many weeks do you think you will be under the radar like that?
Well, I think the healthcare system probably has about a month to go, but we're going to probably see in the next couple of weeks, we're going to start seeing COVID numbers dip. We're in a holiday surge, but we're going to see the numbers dip and hopefully have some normalcy return to this awful pandemic that's been weighing on all of us. But again, I thank you for inviting me, Stan. I'm sorry to the viewers about the inconvenience to them, but I promise to do my due diligence and answer every question sent to us. So thanks again.
Thank you, Greg. Have a good evening.
Take care.
Hi, Greg. So nice to see you again. We
Nice.
had a couple of questions, and as promised, here we are together to answer those questions. So I will start with the first one that came from New Delhi, from Payal Goyal. And Payal is asking, what do you think of having a retina reading device powered by AI in order to predict Parkinson's disease based on picture recognition?
Yeah, I must say I don't entirely understand this question, and I'm certainly willing to have an offline conversation about it. The facts are that AI can do a number of things, including image recognition. It can compare with patients' ability to do image recognition, and it can make some inferences. I'm not quite sure how this particularly relates to Parkinson's as opposed to like an Alzheimer's or some other cognitive disorder. So I have some questions for the sender of this question itself. I logically can't answer it without more information, but AI has the power to do a number of things in image recognition for sure, and be paired with retinal type devices to do retinal scans.
Right. Another question, what do you say to people who have a hard time accepting that physiological signal from wearable sensors can prevent crisis?
Yeah, this is a fascinating question, and I really appreciate it. The fact is we're still learning a lot. I will tell you for sure, I have confidence in AI to take physiologic signals and convert them into valuable insight and inferences that humans can't make. I have less confidence in the current available wearable medical sensors on their ability to produce robust data. Now, some of them we have already proven can produce usable data, such as skin galvanization and certain heart rate and heart monitoring devices. However, there's still a lot of work to be done on the wearable medical device space. AI itself is mature enough to handle any of it, but the actual sensors themselves have a lot of work to mature. And so we'll learn quite a bit over the years. I will say that if you think about how humans make inferences, we're doing it in a way with probably slightly less depth than an AI algorithm can do. For example, we can make an inference that it's summer. In the Northeast of the United States where I live, the days are longer, the temperature's hot, the sun seems brighter, the humidity goes up. Those are all data points that my brain uses to make the inference that it's summer. And that's essentially what a computer's doing. We do that when we're sick too. We didn't sleep well, our body aches, we might have a temperature. Those are all data points that our brain then processes and tells us, hey, we're getting sick. There's no reason to believe that those type of inferences can't be made by computers. And then when you start thinking about how in depth computers can make inferences. For example, trend lines between temperature and skin galvanization and how they relate during different disease processes. I think that the world is going to be really opened as we see more and more physiologic device detectors added with AI inferences. And I think the sky's the limit once we get a lot of sophistication in the devices themselves.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Now, let's talk about machine learning models and how does NeuTiger avoid biases in our model?
Another really great question, and it's something that we're always keeping track of. Certainly, as you expand to different places of service or different patient populations, certainly the first and foremost is to assure that you have a diverse and large data set before you start training your models. And honestly, there's two ways to think about this. You can have a very diverse data set that you're making sure that you can capture all sorts of different types of patients, or you can have an extremely narrow data set that only deals with one patient or a small cohort of patients with like genetics, like backgrounds, like locations in the country. Ideally, it would be great to develop algorithms for an individual patient, but that may or may not be cost effective. Certainly in the current environment, it's probably not super cost effective, but you could imagine a world where we developed basically, very sophisticated algorithms that were precision medicine type algorithms for one patient. Now, I would love to live in that world, but for now, we have to clump patients for resource utilization and to make sure that we can make something affordable. But in the future, we may be streamlined enough to just make an algorithm for one patient, and then those biases become obviously less significant.
Okay, and final question we got is, what is Edge AI and why is it relevant to
Yeah.
healthcare?
I actually think it's relevant to healthcare more than just about any other industry. Edge AI is basically means we're taking the algorithm, the built algorithm, and putting it on the specific device that the patient's wearing, or possibly a medical device in their home, and not having to use any internet connectivity or any cloud connectivity to process the data and make an inference. So let's break this down. We basically can put the algorithm on a watch, on a shoe implant, on a patch that fits on the patient's skin or in their clothing, and that device can collect data and make an inference right there without having to send any information to the cloud. Now, why is that valuable in healthcare? Well, you can imagine, let's take a simple case like, well, it's not necessarily simple, but a case like arrhythmia, where a patient may go in and out of a cardiac arrhythmia. And let's say that most of the time the patient's in a normal heart rate. Well, why would you want a device sending every bit of information of normal data to the cloud to be processed and then sent back to the patient when it's normal, 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 normal? That seems wasteful. That's a waste of energy. It's a waste of data being sent to the cloud. Whereas if the device can make an inference itself on the patient and only send abnormal data to the cloud to alert the clinician, or it can alert the patient locally without sending information to the cloud, that seems much more logical and efficient. Also, think about the situations where, honestly, we don't always have internet connectivity. I know even in my own home or in the hospitals I work in, sometimes I just don't have Wi-Fi or cloud connectivity for brief moments, and that can be a real detriment in a patient with who needs to be alerted immediately about a sickness deteriorating. It could be a real problem in parts of the United States that don't have great internet connectivity, or, for example, the third world or developing nations that are struggling with having widespread Wi-Fi connectivity. And I can tell you in the United States, we don't have it. So those are all situations that you give patients better chances of using these devices and being, less biased towards a socioeconomic situation or geographic situation.
All right. Well, Greg, thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time to come back with us and in order to answer this question.
Thank you very much, Dan.
Have a great weekend. Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.